Really Matters podcast. First of all, can you remember when we first met? Because we have met once.
I do. It was a great adventure getting on the train from Cardiff to Bristol and looking for a cafe. But I managed it, and you rode up in a very high-tech push bike, I remember.
Well, I'll take that. Yeah, I mean, many others would say, what are you on about? That is not high-tech, but for me it is. And obviously for you. I mean, my memories of that day, and this is exactly why I've asked you to come on, John, is I just remember chatting to someone that was so knowledgeable on, the different periods of youth work, the different things that have happened within, underserved communities, particularly talking about Wales. Obviously, I'm from Bristol, you're from Wales, from Cardiff, and, some of the differences with how things are done and a lot of the similarities. I ended up doing my degree the third year over in Wales, and I was always actually just quite annoyed that some of the stuff that went on over there seemed so much more thought through and based on the need than some of the stuff over here. Now, I'm sure we'll get into it in a minute, John. It might not be the case now, but that definitely kind of come through. So yeah, let's take you back first of all. Let's find out a bit more about you, so the viewers understand a bit more about your life growing up. So, what was it like for you growing up in your community? Your challenges and positives, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it was interesting. You just mentioned that you made the link between me and Cardiff. Well, actually, my growing up was a long way away from Cardiff. And that was actually about 25 miles north. I was born in 1948 in the Rhondda Valley, and I give the date because I grew up when coal was still king in the Rhondda, and the river ran black, and there were coal tips everywhere, and there were men walking around with black faces sometimes. And other times with very white, pale faces as they suffered from pneumoconiosis and died before their time because of chest complaints. So I was brought up in the Rhondda Valley, at the top of the Rhondda Valley, in a place called Treherbert. I was born a little further down the valley in a place called Getley. Ended up in Treherbert, which I still remember as being this immense move forward, in the sense that my mum, my dad, my older sister, she's a very special person in my life, my sister, as my brother and my younger sister. We lived before we moved to Treherbert in a house where we shared a bed and could look at the stars. There was a hole in the ceiling. There was a little coal fire downstairs. The toilet was in the garden. And suddenly we were transported to Treherbert to live in this brand spanking, shiny flat with 2 bedrooms and not central heating, but an Arga in the kitchen and a coal fire in the front room. And that was a huge change in terms of, the environment within which you lived. What was I was to find out what was more important about that move to Treherbert was that I lived about 200 yards. Metric hasn't reached me yet most of the time. About 200 yards. About 200 yards from what became one of the most important things in my life, which was Treherbert Boys Club. It actually occupied an old engine shed, which was its 4th home, I found out. And from the age of about 7, I was allowed in through the front door. And they had a big, huge coconut mat on the floor. And with my peers, 7, 6, 8-year-olds, that group of people, we could spend an hour on the coconut mat. We weren't allowed in, really. But Trailblazer Boys Club became such an important part of my life. And it was in Trailblazer Boys Club that I first met adults other than my parents or uncles or aunts. I met people that made significant impacts in my life, quite definitely, really. To go forward a little bit, I went to the local junior school at the age of 11. I failed my 11 plus. And so instead of going to the grammar school, I went to the secondary modern school, Treherbert Secondary Modern. 3 years, three-year groups, 3 groups within each row. So there were 9 classes in the school. And my education stopped for that period of time because my memory is I was only taught 2 things. One was timekeeping. So if I didn't turn up for school on time, I would have a cane. And the other one was doing what I was told. If I didn't do what I was told, I'd have the cane. And the idea was that those were the 2 skills that I needed for my employment destination. And my employment destination was going to be with the NCB. I left school at...
What's the NCB? What's the NCB?
The National Coal Board down the pit. So and it would be wrong to say that I didn't have good times in those 3 years, because I did. You know, it had good. I played rugby. I played football. I used to. I used to have been in the athletics team. And most of the teachers were okay. Most of them, not all of them. Most of them were okay. For instance, and it might further down the track this morning, I might be able to talk about one of the outcomes of that period of time had on my advancement in the academic world. My English teacher, I remember, was Mr. Riggs, a lovely, lovely man. And his lessons consisted of, if it was the winter and it was fine, we'd play football. And if it was the winter and it raining, we did silent reading. And in the summer, if it was fine, we played cricket. And if it was raining, we did silent reading. So I tell people quite seriously that he was a lovely man and was a good support as an adolescent growing up, as were most of the teachers there. At the age of 15, I went underground. I tell people I had a sabbatical weekend. Left school on the Friday, down the pit on a Monday, which isn't quite true because I had to go and have a short period in a classroom to learn how not to kill yourself when you went 800 or 900 feet underground and was working in a 2'9" or a 4'3" seam.
That's a bit of a change from playing cricket, football, silent reading for the last 4 years or whatever it was.
But I knew. See, if you worked underground, you started work at 6 o'clock. That's when your shift started. So I had to be there well before, because you had to change. You had to change out of your work, out your clothes you wore to the pit into pit clothes, and you had to be underground before 6 o'clock. If you didn't, you were sent home and you didn't get paid. So that punctuality was really good. And doing what you're told had some sort of life-threatening implications to it. I worked in Wattstown Colliery for a while. Just a very quick example. One of the jobs I had, 15 and a half, was at the end of a conveyor, swinging all the small coal out of the way to stop the conveyor from blocking up. Stopped the conveyor, and the man who looked after 4 of us young lads said they sent in timber down. So sounds good, something different. So I watched as this, all the roof supports were wood, pine, timber. Lovely as always, smelled nice. The timber came down. I grabbed hold of one of these. They're about 9 foot long, and I don't know, maybe about 9 or 10 inches, perhaps in diameter. And I grabbed hold of it, and by the front end, and it pinned me. It caught me in the chest because it had the weight of the conveyor behind it, and pinned me against the coal face. So I was about to be skewered by this long piece of pine post. And the man who was looking after me wasn't far away. Actually got his sledgehammer and hit it straight out of my chest. He took my shirt and 2 layers of skin, and gave me some very good advice. He bent close to me and said, "John," he said, "take it off the back end, not the front end." So there was that going on. But while I was there, of course, I was actually in the boys' club. I was a very keen basketball player. I was a very keen soccer player, football player, and it was an environment that I actually thrived in. I lived quite close. I was actually, I became part of that boys club very quickly. At the age of 15, in fact, I became the assistant leader of Trailblazer Boys Club. The leader was quite progressive and decided he needed a young person. I didn't really know what that meant. I had the title of assistant leader. The leader was actually a man called Clive Thomas, who was the World Cup referee, football referee, a Premier League referee, but also the leader of Trailblazer Boys Club. And that opened life out for me a little bit, in the sense that I went to London through the boys' club. I went to Derby through the boys' club. Through playing basketball, I got picked for the junior Welsh team. I went to Scotland and played basketball on an American Air Force base. And so the world was really opened up in the sense of what the boys' club gave me. Work-wise, I was in the pit for a couple of years. I went into a local factory. I did okay. I became a production manager. I became the personnel manager. I became the quality manager when I was there. I then worked onto another local factory with a managing responsibility, and then become the factory manager of a company in Caerphilly. But I was never happy. I was coaching some football, doing a bit of basketball. I always felt that I wanted to do something else. So at the age of 13, having had those sorts of experiences, I decided that I saw in the newspaper that they were recruiting trainees to become qualified youth workers. My thought was quite simply, I'd become a qualified youth worker. I spent the rest of my life playing basketball. I would get a basketball team sorted out. I could coach basketball every night, and I'd be happy. And that really was the broad thinking,
Can I ask you a question then? Because,
yeah.
So, I mean, it's really interesting kind of hearing what your I don't know, the kind of experiences that you've had to get to the point. And I can see this is now where the world of youth work is now going to kind of open up, and I can't wait to hear more about this. But when you were growing up and this boys' club was there, and I'm guessing from everything you said, it wasn't like a particularly rich area where there was lots of opportunities for people. So probably there was quite a lot of hardship, and people were, you know, working down mines and all those kind of things, which probably brought lots of stresses and strains, as well as, I guess, a lot of community and people coming together. So, you know, richness as well. But what was the kind of situation? Was most young people within those communities? Did everyone go to the boys' club, or the whatever the was there equivalent for girls? What was the landscape back then?
Yeah, there was a local authority youth club actually in the secondary school that I went to. That was the local authority youth club.
How did you find? I mean, when I say how did you find that, obviously I don't mean like how did you find out where it was. Um, how did you find that, and what was the impact on you? Because
Yeah,
these formative years, there's something
yeah,
happening.
as was commonplace, the youth club, not the boys' club, they were within less than a mile apart. The youth club attracted mostly attracted people who went to the grammar school. That there were two grammar schools in the Rhondda, Pentra Grammar School and Porth, and they generally went to the youth club. And at that time, and I'm talking, I don't know.
And for people that don't know, that would mean that they passed that 11
Them
plus. So they
plus.
were going there, and you were
Yeah,
going and doing the silent reading in your
yeah,
football.
yeah,
And
yeah,
that was the divide, wasn't it?
yeah, yeah. And the youth club structure was very different to the boys' club structure. The youth club structure at that time, and not just in Trio, but all the local authority youth clubs, was you had to do an hour's class. So you turned up and you did something for an hour. And that was a wide variety of classes. It could be cooking, it could be making canoes, it could be pottery, it could be art. But you had to do an hour or an hour and a half in a classroom situation. The woodwork teacher from the secondary modern school was actually the leader of the local authority youth club. So again, it was much more formal than the boys' club. But you know, being 15 or however old, I did feel I needed to give it a try, particularly because there were young women there that I hadn't had the opportunity to meet because they used to get on the bus to go to school. I used to walk to school, and I was a secondary modern lad down the pit, and they were grammar school people who were looking for careers in all sorts of things, teaching or whatever.
How were you looked at then by, how do you feel like you were looked at by people that, was there like a divide of, you know, the
Yeah,
people that are going to grammar school?
absolutely. I'll give you a real example. I was the chief executive of the Wales Youth Agency many years later, and I had the opportunity to go to Turbot Boys Club. I hadn't been there for a long time. And so I turned up as somebody, people knew who I was and what I did. And I met the youth worker, and it turned out that she had been in junior school with my sister, and that's not unusual. But then gone off to grammar school and then off to teacher training, and was teaching until then come back as the lead. Oh no, she was a part-time leader of Turbot. Now, the flat I lived in, I then moved up onto a council estate in Turbot that was still called the Ponderosa, because it was like a Wild West, everybody said. You know, you needed a gun to go up there. It was a tough estate. And while we were having this conversation, she just casually mentioned, I was maybe in my 40s or 50s even. She casually mentioned, yes, she said, we still ban the young people from the council estate because we just find they can't behave. So that was an intergenerational sort of divide.
And it goes on
Yeah,
and
yeah,
on.
yeah,
So
yeah,
the learned behaviours of young people are no different
yeah.
than the learned behaviours of the staff.
yeah. But I was actually given a life ban from True Herbert Boys Club. I didn't tell this person when I turned up that I was the head of youth work strategy for the Welsh government or whatever job I had, and I used to live up the estate because I had a life ban because I had walked to the youth club one night and I had money, which I don't remember where I had it from. Somebody probably given it to me or something. I'd called into the local chip shop and I'd bought myself a can of shandy,
Oh,
which
oh,
I was drinking as I walked to the youth club. And by the time I got there, I'd just about finished it. I put it in the bin. The leader of the club, about half an hour later, stopped the youth club and got everybody into the main hall and was literally apoplectic because somebody had been drinking alcohol in the youth club. And to prove it,
shandy.
yeah, and to prove it, he actually had my can of shandy.
Oh my
Uh,
God.
and he said,
Militant.
I don't suppose, I remember very well, he said, I don't suppose that the person who put this object in the bin, he said, will be prepared to admit it. I said, well, I did it. It's mine. It's a can of shandy. It's like, there's no alcohol in it. He said, you will leave the club immediately and don't come back. So anyway, so that was my
Blimey.
relation.
I tell you what, I would have lasted about half a second in that place.
Yeah, yeah.
But so what's coming through from this is, yeah, I don't know, maybe, obviously different people, different individuals, maybe different training, different eras, different communities, lots of things that are different. But you've gone from being kicked out for having a can of shandy to being the leader or support kind of youth worker, support worker at the age of 15. I wonder at that point, because I mean, it'd be great then to go on to your history and your experience with youth work and the things that have worked well and the things that it could be improved. But first of all, did you feel like even at that stage, when you were at that youth club at 15 years old, which I don't know how you managed to get back in after being kicked out, but whatever, you must have shone brightly. Do you feel like you had your voice heard, and did other young people have their voice heard at that time in the
Yeah.
youth?
No, I never got back in the local authority youth club.
Ah, sorry, it's a different. Okay, yeah.
I
Sorry.
never, I never, not because I'd give them the
Boys
opportunity
club,
to
yeah.
tell me. I felt much more comfortable in the boys' club, much more comfortable. And
Why? Why?
I think I felt I had some value in the boys' club. I was an okay soccer player. I was a good basketball player. I met people who provided a really good example that I hoped that I would take forward in my youth work practice, because the people who were there, and they were all men. There were, I don't know if there were any, not even behind the coffee bar, which wouldn't have been unusual at that time. It was a male-dominated environment. Let me give you an example of one of the youth workers. The first youth worker I had, there was a man called Emlyn Jenkins. And Emlyn Jenkins was about 5'8" and built like a Sherman tank. And I found out during the later time that he was there that he actually was a rugby league player and played for Great Britain. And so Trailblazer Boys Club, which was full of hard boys, were never physically intimidated by Emlyn. But you just looked at him, and if he asked you to do something, you did. Or if he told you to stop doing something, you did. And if he had something to tell you, he would tell you in an honest way. And I just felt more comfortable in that environment. Where the basketball coach, and I say this because when I looked for how was I going to operate as a youth worker in some of the, because I worked in a couple of tough inner city, Cardiff, Ely, but I'd come from an estate that were very similar to those environments, and I liked the honesty. Don't do that, because that isn't right. That's not the thing that you should be doing. You should be doing it this way. I remember about 15. I'd just been picked for the junior Welsh team. I was a cock of the walk. I was on the court, gossiping at everybody and bumping everybody and arguing with the referee. That sort of 15-year-old sort of, the
Yeah.
world's mine. And our basketball coach is a man called Byron Murphy. And during the game, he called a timeout, called me over. He said, John, he said, go and get changed now, leave the club. And when you know why I've asked you to do this, come back. He said, I will get you on the court straight away. I said, you can't send me off. You'll lose if I'm not player. I'm your best player. You can't send me off. He said, you're off. Go and get changed and off. And it was just a really...
What did that teach you, John?
To think. To reflect, to say, what I wanted to come back. I wanted to come back and play basketball. I wanted to. And it was a real wake-up call to say that there was a particular behavior, a particular set of rules. There was a particular, I felt, sense of dignity that he wanted me to think about, because I was acting like a fool. And they were things that when I worked in some of the tough environments, the sort of approaches that I would like to take with young people and try to take with young people, to be honest with them, to make them aware that there were certain norms, that some things are okay, some things are not okay. So the boys' club was quite important. I coached. I started to coach a junior side when I was late teens into my 20s. I did my first international youth exchange. I took a group of young people up to Derby, which was like this huge experience. We're going to England on a bus. I found out recently that I'm guessing that would have been in the 1980s. I was in the top end of the Ronda a couple of months ago and found that exchange is still taking place. The Treherbert and Merlin Boys Club in Derby still do exchanges. They still come down. And
why were you shocked then? Because I get the feeling that you were shocked that was the case. And
it was just, I say shocked. I was pleased.
Yeah.
I was pleased. But I was shocked because the value of that had gone past my sort of involvement. Because very often people do things, don't they? And then they're off. And the person coming behind actually doesn't give it any sort of recognition. But I think there was a feeling in the boys' club that was something that they liked. And they had maintained it.
I'd really like to know, can I ask you a bit more? Because it sounds like these experiences have obviously guided you towards what you ended up doing, 30 years old. At this point, you're going for a job within youth work. You've obviously had experience of different things, and it sounds like most of them had ended up being managerial leadership kind of roles, which tells a story in itself.
Yeah.
I wonder if you could now tell us a bit about your career through youth work, but whilst you go through it, the things that have went well, the things that could possibly be reused now, the things that didn't go so well, and we'll come up to the current day and we'll talk about it more there.
Can I just add one sentence, just again a bit of context, but something that might come later, is up until I'd gone into Caertrefle College, I had never done an exam. I had no qualifications. I had no formal qualifications at all. And so going to Catrevle for me really opened up what I considered to be a big deficit in myself, that I'd never had it wasn't necessary for me to go and do qualifications. I'd got on. I felt by hard work that I did things, and I'll just go back very quickly. When I left the junior school to go to the secondary modern, my teacher shook hands with me. I was 11, after just telling all these people going off to the grammar school how well they would do, and they'd be waving to him from a big car at some point. And he shook my hand, and he said to me the thing that motivated me most throughout my life, still motivates me. He shook my hand and he said, "Rose," he said, "you're a nice lad, but you won't amount to anything." So that I went off. So I had got into positions by working hard and not being and trying to find solutions for things. I went to college. I was 30. I never submitted a piece of work in the entire 2 years I was there because I didn't want it marked. I didn't want to know how badly I was going to do in a formal examination or a formal assessment. It was continual assessment, but I understood the rules were if I put things in 2 weeks late. So every piece of work I had in my youth work career, I put in 2 weeks late, which meant it could be marked as a pass 40%. They would never actually make a judgment on it. They wouldn't say it was 42% or 92%, because I just found that very difficult. So I never, ever put that in. For that,
Can I ask then, like, was that because based on what you've said about your education growing up, it sounds like it was probably quite limited. Like I might be wrong. It's but from what you said, it sounded like that. And it, you know, from everything you've done since then, which we'll find out about in a minute, you've obviously got ability. But those words at that time in your life, do you really feel like, and to be honest, I can tell you similar stories, which is sad, and I suspect there's a lot of people out there have got it as well. You hear those things at that time in your life that stay with you until 30 years old, and then you're doing something which you're passionate about doing, which you want to continue doing and make a difference with, and it still holds you back. That just goes to show, doesn't it?
Yeah. It's actually he's passed away, the teacher. I've often wondered if I would have tried to have found where he was and ask him, how did he know that was going to be true? How did he know that I would never amount to anything? Because that was quite, quite a finite statement. You're 11, you've had it. Off you go to the secondary modern school. You're not going to amount to anything. So it was a tough. And in fact, when I then decided that I wanted and could get involved in the academic side of youth work, why I always chose to do qualifications by dissertation and viva. So it was never something that somebody would externally mark. It was always going to be something that would, I don't know, ease the stress of that for me.
When you reflect on this now, then, because again, we're going to hear about the kind of the different roles that you had, which are obviously they were, well, not obviously, but it will be obvious in a minute, very like high up, and there's lots of not power, but do you know what I mean? Like you're in a position where you're kind of looked at highly by your peers as well. So people, you know that you've got a lot to offer, but to still feel like academically, even like when you got into that academic world, that you necessarily didn't have everything that others might have, or you felt worried about what you had. Is that gone now?
No, I don't think so.
So this is the thing. This is it, isn't it? This stuff sticks with us for life.
Yeah. My PhD supervisor, I knew quite well, professor. I was with him last Friday because he then went on to become the first minister. I want to tell Mark, who I know very well, I want to tell Mark that I'm not the person who wrote the PhD that he supervised. Because I know, it's not that I'd like to know, but I know that actually I never stopped there. I've always tried, even from that point of having a PhD, to improve my writing, to improve my research skills, and to develop further from that final PhD, which following a very tough viva was approved with minor alterations. So it was of an okay standard. But I still want to tell him, look, I didn't stop there. I've continued, because when I did an MPhil, again, I had lunch with my MPhil supervisor recently, and we had a bit of a laugh because she asked me to write a few, a short introduction about what my research was going to be about. So I did 3 or 4 pages and sent it to her, and she's a lovely lady. I'm not sure, one of the African countries. PhD was in English, lovely writer and all the rest of it. So when she returned this to me, and this is what we were having a laugh about, she said to me, she had written on the bottom of every page, she said, it may be useful to help your reader fully understand what you're trying to say if you insert a range of punctuation marks at the bottom of each page and ask your reader to insert them as they see necessary.
I could blooming do with that.
But you see, it goes back to what I said earlier. My last English lesson that I recognize as an English lesson was when I was 11. So actually going from that to writing an MPhil, which was actually...
What is this MPhil, like, for people out there? Because it's like
a Master of Philosophy.
So we are literally talking from year 11 years old, like that. To say that that's like poles apart is unbelievable.
Yeah.
I want to get you talking because I know there's so much gold in here. You've obviously gone, quite a long way from that point of being 11 years old. But you told me earlier on that you met up with colleagues that you used to work with in the 80s. And there was, I think, various different people have gone on to, quite prestigious different roles and everything else. What was the thing in the 80s? What was the thing in those roles that you had in the 80s that produced really powerful impacts for young people? And why was it? And how was it?
Yeah, well, I got my diploma from Catrevle. I was JNC qualified. I'm a qualified youth worker. I took a short contract in London because I felt I'd like that experience, and I went and worked in Tottenham for a few months. I then went as the youth worker for Bewdley, Stourport and Kidderminster, which I've tried on occasions to convince colleagues was actually me working in inner city Birmingham, but it was actually leafy suburbs. I had an office in Stourport, and I spent a year there. I was a fish out of water. I knew it. It was very affluent. Young people would say to me the only thing they wanted was the club to be left as it was, a meeting place for young people from the school. But it was a useful experience. I did a year there. I had been on placement in Cardiff. One of the key workers there was a councillor, dropped me a note and said they've got an inner city project that was on his knees. It was about to be closed. Would I come and spend some time there? Would I come and work there? So I became the project leader of an organization called Grassroots.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, Grassroots, which was, I changed the name because it had such a poor reputation. It was a meeting place for young people to exchange shoplifted goods, to take drugs, to do all sorts of nefarious things. So I took on the job. I spent 5 years there, and again, it just returns me always to those early years of working. You know, I was brought up on a tough council estate. I understood the rules that kept you safe. You know, it's like a bit like lion taming at times. You know, you have to stand there and look them in the eye. But always, you know, I understood how young people saw fairness, and so I always wanted to try to be fair. Wanted to try to get young people motivated to step outside of their experiences and to think about, you know, what they could achieve in life, even if they hadn't been very good at school, even if they hadn't had the sort of achieved the sort of benchmarks that are acceptable in society. One of the things that I did there, I wanted to get people, because the city centre were taking young people from all of the communities in Cardiff who would come in. We set up a music studio. We set up a hot meals luncheon. It was luncheon. It wasn't a luncheon club. That came later. We would do about 100 cooked meals a day. We developed a very good relationship with Marks and Spencer's, which was just up the road, who couldn't do enough for us when they realized we were trying to be serious as a project. So I had 5 good years there. I took an overland trip to Morocco with a colleague from North Ely, where I'd been on placement.
I remember you telling me this little pearl of wisdom. This sounded amazing.
And we also went and did a community aid project in Kenya. And this is for young people who didn't have passports.
Can I just quickly flip you back onto like, I know there's so many different stories you could tell, but that overland tour, to people listening, and this is my memory might be wrong, so like, but that wasn't you just like turn up and there was an overland provider that would say, okay, here's our truck, and then you'd all get in and you'd pay money to them, and then explain a bit more about it, because this is when youth work had freedom and people that were willing to push the boundaries to impact on young people in a positive way could do that. And I think some of the stuff you've done shows that massively.
But let me say what I think is true. If I talk to students about that sort of work that I did, they would say, yes, you were lucky because you could do it then and you can't do it now. What I have to say is I couldn't do it then either. It wasn't allowed.
Right.
It wasn't allowed.
How the hell did you get X amount of people onto? I mean, what was it? Explain more. What was this vehicle? How did that happen?
Well, it'll go back to a bit of theory, really. I had been very interested in an experiment that was done in the USA, which was the wagon train experiment. The wagon train experiment was the end of the road for some very difficult young men, predominantly. In fact, they might have all been all young men who were serious repeat offenders, and nothing that was provided or punished. They kept on reoffending. I saw in the TV clip that I watched a group of these young lads going into a prison where the lifers were, and one of them, little small man, he wasn't big, going up to this great big huge black American and saying to him, he said, "When you come in here," he said, "I'll rape you. I will rape you." It was a simple, and this great big huge lad said, "Yeah," he said, "No, you won't." He said, "I will." He said, "Because I got 4 mates to hold you down."
The reality of what's coming.
So that's the threat, but it didn't work. But what did work is they got together a wagon train, horses, wagons, and they put young offenders on a horse. And depending on how serious their behavior was, depending on what horse they had. So if you were a big, tough, hard lad who could fight and beat everybody, you had a horse that was hard to manage. That was one of their tactics. They then took the wagon train on a year's journey from New York to California. And the people who did that trip, actually, they reversed the reoffending rates. So before that had happened, about 85-ish% of people reoffended. When they went on the wagon train, about 85% of them didn't reoffend. That year that they took to come across the USA in a wagon train, and it was fraught with difficulties. There were lots of challenges. There were lots of people who didn't take it. So it wasn't all, this is wonderful and it'll work. It had success, but it seemed to me quite an exciting idea. Now, if you live in Europe, it's hard to get a wagon train, so I got a bus and used to take young people from Ely, predominantly. We would decide on where we were going to go. Across the Sahara, down to Turkey, down to Sicily. And we developed underneath that a whole range of things that were preparatory. And the preparatory stuff would be, we'd take them to Ireland, or we'd go to Scotland, or we'd go to Germany, and we would use those experiences. And then the people who were motivated would come on something that was a lot longer. We funded it best we could.
And so, I mean, I guess you might have answered it already. We're talking about the wagon train experience, but for young people would have, and was this, I don't know how many times these kind of things happened. I'm guessing probably quite a lot. What was the kind of impact that you now know? And I guess you probably still know of some people that have been through these programs. What kind of feedback did you get from them, and what kind of impact has it had on their lives?
Yeah, life-changing, best thing that's ever happened. And one of the sadnesses of being involved as a youth worker and being involved in a youth worker in the grassroots or in North Ely is to say, this year I've been to 3 funerals of young people that I worked with during that time. They'd be in their 50s. And have died for a variety of reasons, mostly because of the lifestyle they've led, and they've died young. When I go to the funeral, which I always try to do, I will meet the people that I worked with during that period of time. And the only thing I get ever is gratitude and thanks. And it's not what I'm looking for. It's nice. It's actually about, people will say to me, going to the Gower cottage was the best thing that ever happened in my life. You know, I felt settled, and I would have 3 meals, and I would have somebody to talk to if I needed, and it gave me a different view of the world and a different view of my potential. And they wouldn't use those words, but that's what they'd be talking about. And one young man, I'd taken him to Morocco, and I was talking to someone at this funeral, and this big shadow, because he was a tall lad. I turned around, and there was a middle-aged, mature, very well-dressed individual who got me in a grip. And I looked at him. He said, "You don't remember who I am?" "I do." And I said, "I don't." He told me his name, and he had just changed so much. And once he told me who he was, I knew who he was. But what had changed in him was his confidence. He was confident and self-assured, and was working and had a family. You know, seemed okay to me.
The thing that I'm starting to think here, because I know that, and it's going to be good to hear a few more things, a few more stories about that time, around those times, things that worked well back then that could be replicated now that maybe don't happen now. But the thing that comes across with you, John, and I think I'm starting to feel like there's a theme with different people that have pushed the boundaries and really made a difference, is the passion and the drive. Do you know what I mean? You can still see that now, and I don't need to know how old you are, but you've obviously been working within the sector for a long time, and you come with a lived experience as well. And it feels like there's certain components that are part of these different people I'm talking to, from not just in Bristol, in other parts of the country, in Wales and other places. That seems to be the core thing. And then obviously there's kind of lots of learning as well that you've taken on that's helped form and shape these kind of things. Would you agree?
Yeah, and I'm writing a history of the youth work in Wales. I've been writing for a long time, but I will finish it one day, I hope. The introduction actually says that I'm writing it because I'm concerned that something that I value, something that I see as being important in the lives of young people, something that I see as being developmental, something that I see as being of use to individuals and communities, is disregarded by most people. And I really can't work out why it's disregarded. Why does the youth service, as part of a broader educational experience for young people, get marginalized all the time? Because once you've lived it, once you've been in it, once you've actually experienced how powerful it is, and actually what it can do for young people, and young people who perhaps have not gone down a traditional academic route, why do we continue to disregard it? Why? I mean, I have some theories about why, but
what are your thoughts on why you think this is? Because you've obviously got that experience to show the impact over decades. It's not just like flashes in the pan. You can see that generations.
In Wales, and I can only speak about Wales, but I don't see it being much difference anywhere else. The teaching lobby is too powerful. The teaching lobby has taken over ownership of education and learning, that the only thing that's of any value is actually education and learning. I don't get invited to speak to teachers anymore, because I tell them, with their success rate, if the Ford Motor Company had the same success rate as formal education, which has got a percentage level for students to get 4 GCSEs, which they miss every year, if they were in the Ford Motor Company and they made 1,000 cars a year and 400 of them didn't work, they'd go to business. Whereas that's okay for formal education. they can teach 1,000 pupils. Only 600 of them will be a success, but they continue doing what they do.
So is the point that youth work generally is something through informal education can pick up, engaging, inspiring, challenging young people that may or may not be engaging in that education system? I mean, we know the education system doesn't fit for all.
Yeah.
Why do you think then? So in days gone by, you were talking about youth clubs being in schools. Now, I'm not necessarily a massive fan of that, but everyone's different. Why do you think that education doesn't necessarily value what youth work can bring? Or maybe they do in small pockets. I don't know.
Let me give you a broad and researched view. Treherbert Boys Club, Treherbert Youth Club. Treherbert Boys Club are full of lads from up the council estate who come to Treherbert Boys Club and flourish in all sorts of ways. Little tiny club, Treherbert Boys Club. It turned out an Olympic basketball player, and it turned out about 30 Welsh internationals, basketball players, and lots of Welsh international football players, because it created an environment. The youth club actually took grammar school kids who made things, socialized and had a disco on a Friday night. They didn't really experience the value of grounded youth work. They don't understand it. And even politicians, Alan Michael was the first minister in Wales. He was a youth worker, community worker in Ely when I was a student there. They kept him away from young people because that wasn't his skill set. His skill set was organization and management. And he missed that feel, that actual passion, that actual understanding. There's more than one way to learn. There's more than one way to make progress. Teachers in Wales have the agenda for education and learning. Youth workers who don't help themselves are given a very secondary role for it. Let me tell you something very quickly, a piece of research that was done by Welsh Government. It was called the Education and Training Action Plan. And that was going to decide how young people would be educated to meet the requirements of small and medium-sized enterprises in Wales. We're a country of small and medium-sized enterprises. They interviewed a large number of SMEs and said to them, what do you want from young people that you are going to employ? The answer, they must be literate and numerate, critical. They must have IT skills, critical. Academic qualifications, 28% said that's what they were looking for. 88% said they wanted young people who could communicate. 80-odd% said they wanted young people who could work in a team. 88% said they wanted young people who could make decisions. When I got involved in that document, it was like, this is the opening that youth work can take. This is something that we can claim and own for ourselves. We never did anything strategically, and I'm a little bit off of the figures because I haven't looked at them for a while. Youth service gets about £50 million a year in Wales. Education service gets about £2 billion a year. So it's a big difference, isn't it? And if you look at what SMEs want, they want the skills that young people can get. I would talk often about, if you want young people to communicate or work in teams or to solve problems, get them playing football. They'll enjoy it and they learn at the same time, providing the person who is coaching them understands that. Right? As long as they know. And that's just one of the things. A civil servant stood up in Wales some years ago and spoke to an audience and said, I am telling you, you will not spend my money, meaning taxpayers' money, just having young people hanging round a pool table. And from what I understand, not one person got up and said, yes, they are learning the skills of communication and compromise and all those other things that you get when young people come together and talk. So we've been given little hooks to hang things on. For instance, the last National Youth Work Strategy in Wales, 2019, I think, the introduction said, we must have a revolution in education in Wales. We must have a revolution in education in Wales. And not just formal school-based education, but also non-formal education and informal learning.
I.e. youth work.
And we did nothing about it. We say I was long gone.
I don't. Just seems really frustrating. I mean, obviously you're frustrated, and I can absolutely see it. And you know, like everything you're talking about, there's obviously going to be massive similarities with England and other parts of the UK. What you said earlier that you know, it sounds like first ministers have got to be youth workers, because you said someone else that was a first minister used to be a youth worker. So there are people that are getting to the top of the tree in Wales that actually have lived and breathed and have experienced the impact of youth work on themselves and on young people. So, and I'm guessing they will have their own version of stories like yourself. How does that not translate? Now, just to put a little thing in as well, when you were talking about everything you just said then, like, you know that I created something called GAP for similar reasons. All the kind of stuff that businesses say they want doesn't come out of education. Like, it just doesn't. Yeah. So, like, let's create something and create the environment as well, where young people will feel like they can achieve and they've got the skills to do it. Yeah. But you need the environment to start with. What is it that stops government making those decisions? Because it sounds like this is the point, isn't it? Now it's like, yeah, there's a voluntary sector and it's thriving in places. It's not everywhere. Why won't government create something which is wholesale, which is in, you know, all parts of Wales, England, Scotland, wherever it might be? What's holding them back? And what could be done to change that?
Experience. Because you become a prominent politician doesn't mean that you've had that sort of grassroots experience of what youth work is about. They'll claim they have. But very often they will take an administrative role in it rather than to take that hands-on role. And the teaching lobby, I think, is far too strong. There are a couple of significant lobbies in Wales that have the inside track on development, and for education, formal education, also very powerful role, and really is able to continue to get politicians to believe that they can deal with that broad spectrum of learning, which they continually fail to do. So
they don't value it, do they? Because if they did...
No, they don't value it. The 2002, I think, Dimbleby lecture was by the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it's a document that I make students read. It's not a long document. It's the Dimbleby lecture. Rowan Williams. I've got to stop myself saying Rowan Atkinson, but Rowan Williams writes a great piece in which he says that schools aren't actually, that if we turn all our young people over to schools, that they will naturally come out of it as better informed, better behaved individuals, because it don't work, and that the community has got a role and responsibility as well. So it's a nice paper to read, really. And
Well,
we,
I'm writing
we've,
it down. I'm going to read it.
yeah, but if you can't find it, let me know and I'll send you a copy.
Yeah, yeah, no
You will
worries.
find it if you just do a quick search on the Dimbleby lecture. Rowan Williams, Archbishop. Well, is it?
Oh, don't start with all that. You've been so good.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, so where do we go from here, John? Like, I mean, you've obviously you've been doing this work for such a long period of time. You've been working in academia, you've been working in the grassroots, in youth centres, youth provisions, in underserved communities. You made a difference wherever you've been.
Well, let me just go back to that. Wales Youth Agency was closed down. It was closed down. One of the reasons was that we were too focused on youth work. That was the Wales Youth Agency. They closed it down. I was transferred into Welsh government.
What were you doing in the government? What was your role?
I was the head of youth work strategy. So one of the things that I did, I was responsible for writing the first National Youth Work Strategy in 2007. And if you were to look at the strategy and look at the outcomes of youth work, you will find that the outcomes for youth work in that strategy are actually linked directly to the Education and Training Action Group. So it's about communication, it's about team building, it's about those things. It's also about emotional intelligence, which is a phrase I don't use very often, but it is about developing confidence. It is about developing empathy and those sorts of things. And right at the top of it, it's about doing things. We've got to get young people doing things. And in the doing of them, these are the things that will come out of it. And those are the things that will come out of it. Because I'm a real believer that what we should be doing for young people is preparing them for the world of work. And my reason for saying that is that there's only ever been one survey in Wales, and that survey actually identified very clearly, when we asked 1,000 young people what their priorities were, number one was, I want a job. I want a job. I want to work. I want the status that comes with that. I want the money that comes with that. I want the stability that comes with that. So I think if we're going to meet the needs of young people, getting them the skills of employability is important. And those skills of employability are communication, problem solving, etc. Right? And I understand that. And the second thing that they want is they want a family life. They want to be in that security of a family. And the third thing that they want is they want a Ford Cortina and 2 weeks in Mallorca in the summer. Right?
Those days are gone, mate. But I know what you mean. Not a Cortina.
but that's what they said, and we haven't done it since.
I mean, it's going to be equivalent of now, and everything you said then. You're creating a family, aren't you, with the youth provisions? Because some people don't have that network at home. Yeah. Like they get that holistic support, however you want to like dish it up and call what you want to call it. They're getting that through their peers and through those qualified and skilled adults supporting them.
What we'll argue at the moment is when I say these are things, they say, "Oh, we're doing this in school now. We're doing this in school. We're doing this in school."
They don't have a choice, and that right there is the key.
Yeah.
What do you reckon?
Absolutely. I don't know. Absolutely.
Because many don't choose. You said out of 1,000, the 400. Yeah. What happens to the 400 that I'm meeting on the streets that have got no experience and even know what a freaking youth worker is? Because there is no youth service, pretty much.
Yeah.
And you're trying to engage them.
And the thing is, if you know how valuable it is, and if you know how important it can be to young people, and if you know that they can't get it, now that is the ultimate frustration, isn't it? But let me just go back one step to talk about, we got these politicians. Jane Davidson, I took a group of young people to Kenya, North Ely, and she was running a youth club in Dinas Powys. Jane became the education minister, in the first Welsh government. But didn't advance that idea of an integrated education and learning experience that was formal, non-formal, and informal. And
why though? This is, I mean, unless there's levers behind the doors that we don't see.
Well, let me give you an example. My boss in the Welsh government, and the thing to remember is that I went into the Welsh government. I had to stay for 2 years before I could retire with my pension. So I didn't stay there a day longer than that, because I really was uncomfortable working in that environment. But I always remember her saying, Jane Davidson, who was the education minister, my boss, reported to Jane. Jane was moved from education to environment. Head of department said, I'm glad of that. I never told her how badly things were going. So politicians don't always get the full picture.
Yeah, I guess that's the trouble with these, whatever the structures are, as much as you might think you've got the right people there, they don't necessarily have autonomy.
That's right.
I mean, something you said when we were chatting earlier on, which resonated, and I think it's probably more difficult to do now, but it's not impossible, is the value in risk taking with young people. But just, can you put a little bit, the final thing we're going to talk about now, just a little bit more kind of around that kind of concept, because there will be people that be listening to this thinking, what is he on about? Everything is safeguarded. There's a difference between young people not being safe than taking a calculated risk that's, maybe kind of, I don't know, I use the words dynamically risk assessed, because you're doing it, you're going through a process and things change and you've got to react and act. But there's something in that, and I'm going to shut up because I'd love to hear what you say.
When I was away, I'm in Marrakesh. Have you been to Marrakesh?
I have, yeah. And I reckon it would be a nightmare with young people, but amazing as well.
Yeah. I'm in Marrakesh. We stayed in a hotel called Hotel Ali. And the Hotel Ali is the cheapest hotel in Marrakesh, or one of them. But it's got a lovely location. It's across the road from the huge open marketplace from the Medina. I'm sitting 2 or 3 floors up on a balcony. The road's very busy, and out of the corner come 3 or 4 Ely lads. They've got to cross a busy road, which they do with ease, because they cross busy roads every day. That's what they do. They want to get somewhere, there's busy roads. They cross the busy roads. They disappear into the market. And I remember thinking, God, I hope I see those again. But I had confidence in their ability to enjoy the experience and to come back. You can't do a risk assessment. They didn't have risk assessments as a formal process anyway. They don't do risk assessments in Marrakesh, in the marketplace. How do you do it? All it would say is stay in your room and don't move. Now, the people we took away were over 18.
Okay.
Youth work is 11 to 25.
Yeah.
With a priority between 14 and 18. So these people would be 18. I wouldn't take 11-year-olds or 15-year-olds who were relatively inexperienced to that environment.
Okay. So as well.
Sorry?
That's a different slant as well.
And the other issue would be is if somebody came into the youth club and says, I'm 19 and I hear you're off to New York and I'd like to come, I'd say, well, that's good. Go to Thompson's and book a holiday, because we don't do holidays. that if you wanted to come to a trip, there's a process that you'd have to go through. And the process you'd have to go through is you need to do a bit of volunteering here. You need to work in a play scheme. You need to get some commitment to what we are trying to do. And the other thing is we're actually going to take a trip up to the Gower Cottage, which was a facility that we had the use of. We're going up for the weekend. Come with that. And that's the start of the learning process about what we're trying to do, what the rules are, what the expectations are. So from the Gower Cottage, we might say, look, they're still interested. We're going to Ireland next spring. Come to Ireland. We have a couple of days in Ireland with us. And then we'll say, look, we've got a big expedition now. We're going down to Morocco, to Turkey. Do you want to come? Or they'll say, I want to come. By which time they would understand what the process is, what the expectations are. We would, in starting with trips, I remember taking a group to Germany with a particularly difficult group of young people. I said, there's 2 rules. So, just 2 rules. And the 2 rules are, you don't have to go to bed if you don't want. Stay up all night, play cards. That's what you're going to tell me you want to do. That's absolutely fine. The 2 rules are, you don't keep anybody else awake, and we have breakfast at 8 o'clock when you're there for breakfast.
You're going to say that. Be on time. That's something you learned very young.
Yeah. So if actually there's need for other rules, then we'll talk to you about them. But those that, because people say to me, what time I got to go to bed? Well, people go to bed when they're tired and they go to sleep. But what if I want to play cards? You play cards. But you don't keep people awake, and you're sitting down for breakfast at 8 o'clock because somebody's made it for you. And actually, we start with 2 rules. Perhaps by the end of the week, we'll have 3 or 5 or 2. But there's a process. And
the point, and the learning is in that process. But by the time you're going off and you're doing these different journeys, then by that point, they understand what's expected of them. And I think the thing that's interesting of what you're talking about as well, and I've always thought this, and sometimes actually quite a lot of the time I come up against people that are saying, yeah, but you're working with young people that are over 18, so like people don't really want to fund that like that. Like they're not young people, are they? They're adults. And I'm like, all this kind of thing of like youth working in its stereotypical kind of way up to 25 with learning difficulties and all that. The amount of young people, and you're still a young person at 25 that you meet out in the community, out in the streets, wherever it is, that have not had the right start in life, haven't necessarily had the support of that informal education youth provision that we know used to exist, and they've got all the talent but limited opportunities, and they're still in a situation that is never really going to kind of result in positive opportunities and impact on their life, and then on their families, and then on and on and on.
Yeah.
So, when I spoke to you about GAP's this program we put together, we piloted it now. It is up for 25, and then we've even extended it up to 30.
Yeah.
And people are like, yeah, but you can't. They're not young people. For me, they are, and the impact is freaking huge. And I could, it, and I guess that we just need to cut down the rules, don't we?
Yeah, and I think there's 2 issues around that, up to 25 or beyond 25. Actually, I don't think the Wales Youth Service certainly hasn't taken too much notice of the science around adolescent brain development, and actually about that opportunities that we now know are definitive, that you can have changes in behavior, etc., up to the age of 25. And so if you're having good experiences, positive experiences, you're switching lights on in the brain, and that's only good for you. So that whole issue of adolescent brain development is really important. And the other issue is I got some money. I ran a project a couple of years ago, which was male suicide. That the largest group of people committing suicide in our society are young men of a certain age. And that age is late teens into early 30s.
And they
actually,
have no support at that point.
Yeah.
And that's the point.
And so those are the arguments for it, aren't they? They are the arguments for. But you see, just very briefly, I want to write something about it. The term status zero, which drives me a bit mad, really, because actually I know people that I've worked with don't meet any of the criteria to have a status, but actually they are the leaders of young people in their community, and they certainly have status above, what the system will say. People who are shakers and movers. As a young lad used to come into Youth Club years ago, and he was a wheeler dealer. He was into scrap and all the rest of it, and always had a wad of, £20 note in his back pocket. But technically, would be seen as neat or status zero. And that's the other thing, which I think we need to give some attention to, not in education, employment, or training. It is the human state to learn. What we've got to be careful is that in that human state of learning, that they're learning positive, useful things rather than negative things.
Of interest as well.
Sorry?
Of interest as well.
Yeah.
To light the flame under wanting to learn.
Yeah, of course. And how many people have we met? Particularly, we meet people who've been inside for a while and just talk about what they've picked up in prison. There's almost adult education in prison, isn't there, in an informal way. I now know how to open cars or. So we've got to recognise that there isn't a vacuum within which young people aren't learning. They may be learning the wrong things. And so what we've got to do is to set up a system that gets them learning in a different way and learning the right things, the useful things, rather than the negative, dangerous things. But we've just, again, compartmentalized, status zero as a derogatory term. I think that there might be, but I don't like that term. And neat, people are always learning. It's what they learn is the important bit. And that's the role of a youth worker, I think, to make sure they learn the right things.
Yeah, I mean, and on that note, it just feels like that's, I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but that's where we're at, aren't we? We don't have the system that enables all young people to be able to have the kind of provision that's based on need, that's outside of the education system that they choose to come to, that will then cater for those needs, to support them into those different opportunities. And if we've seen it work before in different ways, and that will be different now slightly, but there's definitely things that you said that we could take forward. And I wonder, on that last note, I think there is something positive to take forward, is that we've seen things work in the past. We still see things work now, but the difference is we don't have that infrastructure.
Yeah.
And we don't get to kind of draw in those curious minds. There's still some people that are really passionate, and I mean, it's not that I'm particularly whatever, I'm not saying anything, but the difference is there are people that are really passionate, that literally give their all and are willing to change and create new ways of working to try and, to support young people best they can. But that's going to be limited because of the opportunities for employment. So
that's right.
I think we can turn it around. We just need the government to kind of back us, whether that be in Wales, whether that be in England. Is there anything?
I think there are two things we need to do. We need to come together. The youth service needs to come together, and it needs to provide strategic comment and action to policymakers. I think of Wales has for some time had things done to it, and it's not really made a contribution as an organisation. And in fact, it probably doesn't think that that's its role, maybe because it's quite distant. We used to have an organisation called the Welsh Association of Full-Time Youth and Community Workers, and for a number of years, it just provided a focus for youth workers to come together, and it said to government, local authorities, national government, if you're talking about youth work, we've got to be involved because we're the deliverers of it. So they need to come together and they need to be more thoughtful in what they're trying to do.
And I don't think that'd be any different in England. So the kind of roadmap is there, the starting point for the roadmap. It's now just about whether this kind of work is valued by governments, where they'd be happy to pick up these discussions that result in actions based on people that understand at the coalface, as well as the strategic stuff that you're talking about. Oh my word! Wow. I think there's some positives in there, but there's the reality, isn't there, of the situation. And I mean, thanks for sharing a lot of that knowledge. I know there was a lot more that we could have gone into, but I'm very mindful of the time. Is there anything you'd like to kind of say and ask out there, or something about, we normally ask people to say something about what really matters to them, whether that be professional, personally, whatever, something along those lines, or there could be, you could leave the podcast with an ask, putting it out there to people that might be listening, could be in youth work.
I guess the message I have, and I'm going to be talking to some students next week, it's about staying strong. It's about being strong. And in staying strong and being strong, it's actually being aware of what the value and importance of youth work is to young people, to society, and to the communities within which they work. Because it's of advantage to all of those for us to have a strong youth service. I mean, I mentioned very quickly, for 2 years, I was the assistant and then deputy police and crime commissioner, looking at ways to get young people away from criminal activity, antisocial activity, and what's written by chief constables about reducing crime say where there's a strong youth service, there's a reduction in crime and antisocial behaviour. So even for that reason, we've got to be better than we are. Better resourced, better prepared, more determined to actually keep this thing called youth work going.
Yeah. Intervention, isn't it? Before these things happen, with that youth service there.
Yeah.
John, thank you for sharing. A lot of things that you spoke there. I'm sure that's going to resonate with a lot of other people. Thank you for coming on, and we will get this out soon. And if anyone wants to get hold of John, to talk to John about anything else, then get in touch, and I'm sure John would be able to talk to other people.
Yeah.